All right, so I'm going to go through the executive functioning binder. This is not where I'm going to talk about how to use each lesson in depth. You have an instruction guide that you can use that has like scripted ways to introduce things, scripted ways to discuss each of these lessons with students. So this is just a guide for me to help you understand how to use the binder to your best advantage. So the binder starts with the two check-ins that are in a separate video, the emotional control check-in and the planning and prioritizing. So that one can be a little bit separate. Then you come into the executive functioning program overview, and this is our table of contents. So this is where we have each of the lessons. The topic is here, and then the lessons each have these are a page or two. Some of them are more instructor guided, and some of them require the students to write things out. It depends what type of student you have for which ones are going to be more effective than the others. The point of this whole binder is not to rush through all of these lessons just so you can say you finished them. The point is to figure out with the student which are their hardest things that they already don't really have a good grasp on. And those are our areas for growth. And once you figure that out about your student, that's when you can kind of pick which of these topics, which of these lessons you're going to want to do the most of. So as you start with this first section is all learning style awareness, so you can learn about the different learning styles, and then self-reflection of your own learning styles. So this is just a few assessments and kind of quizzes that you can do with your student to figure out what kind of learner they are. So that's where you're really gonna dive into, in those first couple sessions with your student, figure out what their areas of growth are, and then you can kind of go through these and decide okay, do you have your emotions in check and you probably don't need to work that much on emotional control, or do you think that time management is something that they need to do better? And then this is where you'll prioritize what you think the student needs to do the most of. So as we're kind of going through the table of contents here, you can write down your areas of growth once you figure that out. It doesn't have to be immediately. And then we also have date started and date completed. So if you are able to complete a lesson, and it might take you a month, it might take you a week, or maybe just one session to finish one of these lessons. It's totally different for each student. And you can also kind of use this as a guide to tell you which ones you want to go back to. So sometimes students come in and they have a lot of things they want to work on that day. So maybe that during their emotional control check-in, you can talk to them about if that's their goal for today is to get their homework done, then you can spend the majority of time doing that, and which means that maybe our next session they'll come back and you'll do one of these lessons. So really use this as a guide. And so here are the quizzes. So we'll just kind of briefly go through here, but like I said, you have an instructor guide, so that should really help you. So we have learning style. So yeah, this whole first section is getting the students to reflect on what they already know about themselves, their strengths, their weaknesses, what they think they could do better, talking about the structure of the brain. Our brains don't fully develop until we're in our late 20s, so explaining that to students is really important. This is all a way for the student to become better at reflecting on their own learning style. So that's part of metacognition too. Executive functioning, what does it mean? All right, and then we have this list here is really good. It gets them to practice the different parts of executive functioning, which ones that they think they need more help on. And this goes through each one, the definition of it, and then an example as well, so they can give their own examples to try and understand it. Then we have emotional control. So most of the time, emotional control is an important one because it's something that is hard to learn for kids. So if you can tell when a student comes in and they're really upset, then maybe you come to this right away. And we also have these two. There's the worry board and the hard times board, and these two are really important for students that have trouble with anger and with anxiety or worrying. So those can be really hindering emotions to have and really distracting ones. So if you find that your students coming in and they seem anxious or they seem angry at different things, then these are really good to use from the beginning, and then continue to use them throughout your sessions. So we'll keep going through here. This is the mindfulness section. So you can use some of these breathing exercises, trying them at home, and then the trigger page goes with that as well. So thinking about their own triggers. So this whole section is really good for students that have heightened emotions generally. And then we have goal-directed persistence. So this can be really good to use from the beginning as well, because it gets the student to think about their long-term goals and what they can do, what really small steps can they take to reach their long-term goals. Depending on how old the student is, maybe in 5 years they're graduating from high school, and in 10 years they have a job, or maybe in 10 years they're graduating from high school. So you can kind of fill out this goal timeline. Okay, so then we jump into time management down here. So this is a few sections. This is a really good way to start this time management analogy to kind of relate it to other parts of your life. Out of sight, out of mind, that's a good lesson. So some of these are more interactive than others. So this one's kind of going through like different materials the student can get. Okay, so then we're going to get into keeping organized. So there's a few lessons on time management. So if that's something your student needs to work on, definitely use those several lessons. And then we have organization. So you can start with this list of materials, helping the students figure out what is going to work best for them, and then make a plan to go get those materials if they need to. Weekly organization, so making sure they do this once a week, maybe setting a time on a Sunday evening for 10 minutes to do all of this. And then here's some examples so that they can kind of see why it's so important to stay organized. And then we have active study strategies. So this is for students who are clearly not finding, either they're not finding the right time, or they don't know how long things are taking them, or they really don't know how to study for tests or do projects. So you can practice like asking them what they already do to study and whether they think it's effective, and when have they done the best on exams, and what kind of study strategies did they use for those exams. So these are examples for reading, and then this one is really helpful for making connections when they're reading something. If a student gets really distracted, you can kind of think about, okay, well, let's relate it to ourselves, let's relate it to another book, other friends, people, your classmates, and what's going on in the world. And then you can have an example to do by themselves, note-taking skills. So this one, then we get into don't halt your learning. So this is also part of study strategies, because it's taking the time to recognize, like, are you in the right mood to study for this test? Is it going to be an effective time to study? And if you are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, then you might not be in the right place to study. So how can we fix that so that we are in the right place to study? This one's also when you were bored. So thinking of the time that you were bored, where you couldn't get anything done and you thought everything was really boring. So figuring out why, and then how can we make it not boring? How can you relate it then back to something that you do think is interesting? And then this last page is just an executive skills survey reflection. So this is usually, you don't have to do this after you're completely done with the entire binder. It could be something that you do at the end of the year, when the student is reflecting on their own progress. In general, as long as we see growth, that's the goal, right?